Podcast, a podcast offering discussions and tutorials on nerdy subjects for people who aren't necessarily nerdy themselves. With you today, myself is your nerdy tutor, George, and with me here today, again, little brother, Mighty Morphin Power Ranger, the Green Ranger.
Well, I prefer Greek Ranger, but
All
that's
right,
just me.
That's him. So, we watched some Kamen Rider and some Super Sentai shows. We have opinions on them. And what was your initial take on some of these?
So at least for the Super Sentai anyway, it actually was not the first one I've ever watched, but it did remind me that it was, well, at least that one in particular was especially comical, or well, no, not comical.
Lighthearted, maybe.
I wouldn't even necessarily, very, very childlike. The villain was very much just focused on messing with kids, and it's one of those things like, oh yeah, that's right, this is like a TV show for kids.
Yes, and I mean Super Sentai is kind of meant for children, and Kamen Rider, as much as it's aimed toward children, is always, I think, kind of catered to like teens to adults, because it tends to gravitate toward a slightly more complex narrative in some cases. Especially from the ones I've watched, like O's definitely has a very complex narrative going on in a lot of cases, but I can certainly see how someone could see that. So first one we watched was Zyuranger, which is the original version of what we know here in America as the Power Rangers.
Mighty Morphin specifically.
Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the first initial season with the red, blue, black, yellow, and pink Rangers as we know them. It was a very 90s show.
Yeah. Well, okay, like I said earlier, the main thing that I ended up noticing was really more just, oh wow, you could really tell this was aimed at kids specifically. But that aside, I actually still liked the tone of like the second two episodes that we watched, because the first one was very much focused on just, hey, I'm gonna mess with these kids, and then the second two were like, hey, let's go get some legendary weapons, and I don't know, I actually really dug the tone of the second two episodes.
In what way?
Okay, to be fair, I was raised on Power Rangers, so I don't know, it just very much was up my alley.
Do you think it was very much similar to what was Power Rangers at the time, or?
Not necessarily Power Rangers specifically, but I don't know, I got a somewhat, I'm trying to think how to properly phrase my thoughts here. The tone, I don't know, the tone had a nice mix of like fantasy versus, what would you even call tokusatsu? Like fantastical?
I would go with fantastical. I mean, Zyuranger was also one of the first times in which it was more primarily fantasy-based aspect. And so, what's unique about it here is that rather than having any sort of centralized organization like, the Earth Defense Force or some sort of army defense, government-issued sort of service, and a lot of the other ones being more heavily mechanical in nature or scientific based, transforming into cyborg android mutants or some nature or form here. I always found this variation of Sentai to be, again, has a far more fantastical route. Let's set the premise here. So the first episode, apparently there's a planet called Nemesis, and that's what we fly to. Who wants to go to a planet called Nemesis? Much less, how did we get so close to Nemesis that we were able to get to it?
I think they explained it was a cosmological event of some sort. I'm not sure. But I also got that was just like the... There are a couple of things here and there that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers versus Zyuranger, like, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers kind of did it better. For example, like, that entire first bit of Rita Repulsa being locked in a dumpster on the moon, literally the same thing in Zyuranger, except instead of a moon, it's another planet called Nemesis that just kind of just appeared in our, like, close enough to the Earth that we could send astronauts to. I
Astronauts with children.
Yes, astronauts with children on board. Yes, I forgot about that. That was a little odd.
Also, the cockpit will eventually become the Megazord in our case.
This is true.
You can see it in the look of it at the end of the day. It was, didn't look like a shuttle.
This is very true. But no, like that aspect, like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, they refined it and made it a little bit better. It's like, oh yeah, no, she was just sealed away in a dumpster on the moon. Like, okay, that I don't know. That clicks in my brain a little bit better.
You'd think somebody could get to the moon. We've been to the moon a little bit more clearly, and
yeah,
it's
not a random rock.
We found this thing on the moon. It looks like it's got a lid. Why don't we try to see what's inside?
Yeah.
It kind of makes more sense, absolutely.
As opposed to, hey, we're on an alien planet. There's nothing around here. Hey, wait, look over there. Which is like almost word for word what happens.
Well, again, I mean, this is again one of those series in which you do have to suspend your disbelief for. Because otherwise none of it makes sense. I mean, like, again, where, like, you get to the notion here, like, where... And this is actually the second episode in which we saw magic elevators, too. Because, again, we see magic elevators when we watch X-Aid. They apparently go down to another secret basement.
Oh, that's right.
And apparently this sage guy hits a couple buttons and goes down to another secret floor to find the Zyurangers, who are all apparently sleep on mirrors in, like, their closets or wardrobes, I guess.
For context... Think Superman 2, like, where Zod ends up getting thrown in that little cosmic... Phantom... Well, yes, but, like, the little... Yes, I know it's the Phantom Zone, but, like, the little...
Mirrors that kind of,
yeah, literally the quadrilateral shape of it.
Basically, it's a solid plane, and they're, like, just sleeping in what's in a solid 2D plane.
It's literally the exact same thing.
It's fairly accurate.
Yeah.
I won't disagree. We wake up all the initial Zyurangers except the Tyrannosaur Ranger, because his door's got a key apparently, and it's broken.
Something like that.
But he eventually gets out.
Yeah.
And the first episode is them just kind of getting there. The second episode is them, how would you say...
actually solving the crisis. Literally, the first episode is just sort of setting the stage for everything, and then at the end of the episode, oh, yay, the Zyurangers are here. And then the second episode after that, it is just, okay, cool, now let's actually fight.
Yeah, they actually fight, and they break their weapons, which leads us into episodes 3 and 4, which is them literally going into one of the guy's closets to a place called the Land of Despair, which just happens to be in somebody else's closet.
I still maintain that it's sort of like a dimensional door sort of thing, a la Doctor Strange, like the one room in Doctor Strange.
I'm willing to give that. Again, it's just these rooms look like people's wardrobes at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, I think closet when I think wardrobe. But we get to the Land of Despair, where apparently if you stay on there for 24 hours, you become a rock or a statue, and you see plenty of other statuesque kind of guys there. It would be kind of interesting that and I thought here was that we have to get these powerful weapons to beat Rita, or to beat Bandora, which is the bad guy, which is the evil Empress's name here. And in the process of getting the weapons, you actually free all these bad guys who end up becoming... loyal servants of Bandora at the end of the day, which I think would be kind of more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
That you have to go, that in order to get these powers, you realize that you were actually kind of tricked into getting this stuff. That, yeah, it'll make it more difficult it'll make your life more difficult, but as a result, you actually get this huge onslaught of an army that you get to play with now. Which I think would be kind of interesting. It's how I would do if I did a Super Sentai series now. Kind of just be there as kind of a lone man team causing havoc, and then realize that I know they're bad guys that kept these powerful weapons in just like a prison or something, and if they get these weapons, they'll free everybody into prison. They just don't realize that's what they're going to do. Now, and then I'll have just a horde of people to play with. That's how I would do it.
Oh, what's one of the other things, simply just for context, is that part of the reason why I mentioned the fantastical element earlier is because the Zyurangers aren't like you mentioned earlier. They're not part of a government thing. They're knights. They're knights from different
They're like
tribes.
they're knights from different tribes. Their powers are not mechanical necessarily. I mean, they come from a magical source, and not any sort of technological source at all. I mean, that has some sort of quantifiable sort of element to it all. I mean, like, they literally at one point actually take their morphers, or as we would call them morphers, they're just their transformation device, are actually fighting with them as like a makeshift sort of knuckle guard, I guess.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They did kind of do that at one point.
But again, like, you can clearly see that this is meant for children. I mean, so one of the things I took from it here at the end of the day, it was very hard to separate the Power Rangers from Zyuranger at the end of the day in my head.
How so?
Because I kept seeing the actors, and I kept thinking, oh, that's Jason under there. Oh, look, that's Billy. Oh, that's God, what was the Mammoth Ranger?
Zach?
Zach. There's Zach, and there's Trini, and then there's Kimberly. Like, I was hard in my mind to not see them and think, oh, that's who was underneath it. They're just speaking Japanese today. And of course, to realize I know that that's not how it works, and I know that it's not here. I'm also really pissed off. They had fucking motorcycles.
Oh, yeah.
Again, now, eventually the Power Rangers introduced the shark cycles at but that's by like season 3. You had like 3 seasons. No, they already had motorcycles in this version.
Look at that. They're barely even used.
I guess.
They only ever actually got used for like 2 scenes total. And
that we've seen thus far.
Fair point.
We haven't watched a lot of it. Maybe they come into more Starkly Point maybe later on, but you also kind of got to wonder here that, like, it also kind of brings into a stark contrast. When you look at the Power Rangers as it was,
mm-hmm.
It was clearly a city that had a lot of green parks and stuff in it. You never really saw a lot of tall skyscraper buildings. You didn't feel like you were in a downtown sort of setting. If you were like in the suburbs where like we were versus like downtown for us. Like, you'd have to travel to get to downtown, it felt like. You felt like we were like Angel Grove was the suburbs of whatever downtown district there was. And here in Zyuranger, no, it very much feels like you're in downtown the entire time. Which is very common of Japanese sort of locations here, and I can speak to this more clearly here, that a lot of the taller buildings are some of our office complexes, but a lot of them, the taller buildings, are especially just apartments. And a lot of them are just, the typical kind of Japanese-style apartment where they're, maybe 450 to 600 square feet inside of it. And it's a very vertical sort of thing. And to get to it, you got to take stairs because the elevator it may not exist. And again, these apartments might go up like 20 stories. Or maybe not 20 stories, but like at least 10 to 15.
Weird.
But again, I mean, that's very much the Japanese culture at the end of the day. You don't take up more space than you need to. And you have to remember that Japan's a land of very minimal sort of land options at the end of the day. If they had decided that they wanted to, build on regular land, as it were, to just build houses and stuff, they would have been out of land back in by the mid-90s, if not, the 60s or 70s by that point. And it's much easier to go up than it is to go to spread out. And so even when we were in Japan, my mom and me saw a lot of underground shops, restaurants, either attached to subways or just on their own. Which is actually kind of cool when you think about it, because again, you go into these places where they're underground. They're built out infrastructures just completely underground. And again, I mean, like, it would look, there's no windows or anything, which is always a little bizarre. So, but it's like being in a very tight mall. Like, if you can imagine a mall, but imagine you physically shrank the size of it down. So the hallways were barely maybe, let's say, 10, 15 feet across. and the shops were probably no bigger than maybe maybe 15, 20 feet as well. You know, maybe a 20-foot by 10-foot sort of room almost. But that was a person's shop, and maybe you had a slightly bigger one that was a restaurant maybe. But we saw those all the time in Japan, and especially when we first got to Osaka. Again, Dotonbori was very popular, but just to the train station just directly next to it, or to the site, or directly a tangent to it, was this great underground covered market where, again, I don't think you could eat the same thing twice in a month. If you went to you could go to a different restaurant every single day of the week and not eat at the same place twice.
Huh.
Very easy. And again, in just that little shopping district, that's how many restaurants there were. And then if you went above, again, they had more restaurants upstairs as well. Which is I found very interesting because, again, I mean, there are more. You got to remember, there are about as many restaurants in Japan as there are in America.
I dig it.
And you got to remember that by comparison to Japan, much smaller amount of space, so they're much more tightly compacted.
Well, here, let's get back on track.
But get back on topic. And no, again, I mean, it was interesting to me because, again, I found the tangent of what was the city in Zyuranger versus what I've always thought of what the city would have been in Power Rangers was a stark difference to me, at least. Or at least how I saw it at the end of the day. You had the typical, like, base location sort of thing where, like, if you had it in Power Rangers, you actually had 3 bases, if you really count it. You had the school, you had the quasi-gym / karate center / community center sort of thing. And then you actually had the command center. The Zyuranger, you had a command center, but everything else was just outdoor shots.
Also, no Zordon. Like, when we made it into Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, when we took Zyuranger and turned into Power Rangers, that's one thing that we sort of... Those are other things that ended up getting added in, as well as, like, making it much more technology-based, which I can't necessarily fault them for, because, like, during the transformation sequence, they do have the little wireframe thing, as opposed to a more magical...
sort of way that they transform.
Yeah. Although, actually, that does remind me. One thing I think Power Rangers also does better than Zyuranger is the transformation sequence itself. Simply because, like, even though all it really is just, you know, the mugshot of them saying their respective Zord or
robot or their power at the end of the day, whatever's on their helmet.
Yeah. Even that, like, you get a little mugshot, you get a little electric background thing, and then they transform. Whereas in Zyuranger, they just kind of pull out the things, and then you see the wireframe bit, and then they transform, and that's...
And it usually was just the one, too.
Yeah, as opposed to all of them.
I don't know if we ever get actually all of them at one point here. Because I don't remember that in Power Rangers at all. If I ever did it, because they always did the Red Ranger last, because that was the last. He was like the last guy to announce himself.
Yeah.
And usually when they transform, they're in some sort of a team of some sort. So, but no, I agree. I think we did better here in America as far as the transformation sequence. But again, I mean, it's interesting that for the 90s, again, I mean, like, there wasn't a lot of special effects that they were already spending on pyrotechnics and monster costumes, I think.
Not even just that, but giant props as well. That actually does remind me. I really do like the... Oh, what is the word for it? The blending of various... Compositing. The blending of various different, like, special effects. At one point, they actually had a giant prop hand holding the actual Red Ranger, and then in the background, then in the foreground, you actually had the suit actor who was supposed to play the giant monster, slowly menacing his other arm towards him. And for what it was, because this was in like 91, 92, I think that's pretty damn solid. Like, I know, you know, yeah, they still had special effects back then for sure, but I don't know, for like a low budget TV show, this was well, maybe not low budget, but still, I mean, for a TV show, that, admittedly, there's some parts that kind of have to like make on the cheap and or recycle.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought that was just pretty amazing, especially for the time, especially compared to X-Aid, but I feel like that's more of a stylistic issue as opposed to...
Well, we can talk about X-Aid later, because the X-Aid is completely off, completely 180 of this, I think, at the end of the day. Very different.
It really is.
So, how did this relate to other Sentai series, since you've mentioned you've seen other Sentai series before?
So the one series I actually really liked watching while I was in high school was Gokaiger.
Okay.
And so this was the pirate team. This was the 35th anniversary season. That was the first Super Sentai that I had watched, simply because their main gimmick was that they could transform into the other Rangers from other seasons, which I thought was super rad. And they usually had like a single episode featuring someone from the old cast in each one.
They also had a kind of a cool looking suit at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, no, they blended the sort of pirate aesthetic pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to the thing, even though it was a kids show, it still didn't have... I mean, not to say that it didn't have a childlike air to it, but it definitely felt like it was aimed not necessarily for, like, teens per se, but more maybe, like, pre-teens to teens.
Well, I think what's interesting about Super Sentai by comparison to Power Rangers, when we get to that team there, when you think about it, they're, again, that's a 40th anniversary show, and to consider it a 40th anniversary show, you're going to have a lot of people who would have seen those much older shows, so you're pulling in a much larger audience there as well. But that's what I always find kind of interesting, is that a lot of, even though these shows are kind of meant for a younger demographic, that they very much pull a much older demographic as well. I could say that when we were in Japan, we saw a lot of toys for the new Kamen Rider series, but a lot of toys for the Super Sentai teams as well, mixed in amongst the regular like high-end sort of toys or collectibles you might get from shops typically for other stuff. What I find kind of interesting here is that, again, much like in the same way, like My Little Pony's My Little Pony has a large demographic that's actually older male adults, despite the fact that it's primarily meant for preteen girls, which is kind of odd. What I think is interesting is that I think at the end of the day, when we get to Japanese shows, it's not that they expect more of their audience, but they don't sugarcoat it for their audience. You know, like, I think in a lot of cases they are willing to be upfront with their audience and be like, "This is what this is. You might have to learn about this one way or another later. Hey, it's a friendlier version of learning about some of this stuff." Or at least they don't treat their audience that's mainly of kids as kids. Does that make sense?
Sort of. I mean, I definitely understand your point.
Mm-hmm.
I semi-disagree, at least for in the case of Zyuranger anyway.
Okay.
Zyuranger, like...
Zyuranger very much feels like it was meant for children.
Oh, yeah. No, and then, like children, like if we're talking about age demographics, it very much felt like this was supposed to be aimed from, like, 5 to 10, at least based on the first, like...
couple episodes.
2 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Second 2 episodes, the tone shifted a little bit.
To maybe like a 8, 9 to maybe like a 12, 13 sort of range.
I would say 8, 9, 10.
Okay.
Because at the end, you still had the Rangers going in to save a kid. It's like, study hard and, like, you know, do your homework and all that good stuff. And that actually reminds me, that's one thing I found somewhat jarring at the end of the episode, because Rita Repulsa, or, well, Bandora in this case,
mm-hmm.
picked on this kid specifically. It's like, because the kid was like, "I wish my mom didn't exist because she's making me do homework and study instead of hanging out with my friends because I got a 30 on my exam." Which, to be fair, you got a 30 out of 100, kid. That's pretty bad. But
true.
She's picking on this kid, and it's like, "Oh, you wish your mom didn't exist? Well, here's a magic thing. Now you're in the land of despair. Ha 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 ha." And at the end of the episode, you know, or the second episode, because it's sort of the inverse of what you mentioned before, where
It was, yeah.
yeah, where the Super Sentai kind of has a single episode stretched into two, whereas Kamen Rider, it was just kind of a monster of the week sort of thing, or at least maybe it was just these two particular series that had that sort of mantra or that sort of theme switch. Mm-hmm. But anyways, back on the main thing. What's it? The Rangers at the end were just like, yeah, study hard, kid, stay in school kind of thing. And I couldn't help but wonder, it's like, wait, like, 3 of these guys didn't even meet the kid, nor did they even know that he was even, like, in trouble for not having studied. And so, I don't know. Outside of that definitely threw me off a little bit. Is, I guess, maybe what would you call that? A continuity error, if anything?
I suppose it could be a continuity error.
I don't know. That aside, ignoring the parts where, children are sort of shoehorned in, I actually still rather liked Zyuranger, because the tone, as soon as the kids were not there, the tone definitely seemed somewhat older, as the Rangers are just kind of getting to do their thing with each other, as opposed to having to come in and save some kids from a rocket that's in like some sort of almost James Bondish-esque contraption.
Yeah, literally with a mace ball hanging above it, as a
magnifying glass is burning a string.
Or a rope, yeah. It's literally burning a rope and is about to fall onto it. Oh my goodness, will they save him or not?
Yeah. Ignoring that element, it actually, I wouldn't even say, like, was much more tolerable, because it was still tolerable with the whole kid thing, but I don't know, it seemed better when it was more focused on the Rangers and the actual, like, characters, the actual people whose names, whose team name is the show,
versus this other element which we'll never see ever again.
Yeah, where it's literally this one kid of the week who needs help.
It'd be kind of interesting. It's the same kid over and over again, though, wouldn't it be? Like, what does this one kid have to do? Why is Bandora so hell bent on this one kid? Is
it actually one kid?
It'd be kind of funny if it was.
See, that I feel like that would actually make it much more interesting. I feel like that would be much more excusable.
But again, if we just kept introducing to the same kid over and over again, and somebody finally just asked, by episode like 10 or 15, we're finally asking the question, what is up with Bandora picking on this one kid, or everything happening around this one kid? What's going on with this? And nobody having a great answer would be even better until like midway through you realize, oh, this is the reincarnation of somebody she doesn't like or something, or the great sage or something.
Yeah, I would like that.
That they introduced like much earlier, so. Because again, I think it could be interesting if you... it would be even better is if the kid's not mentioned in the title card at all. It's just a kid, it's just the same kid over and over, and it's not until like mid-season that you actually get introduced in the title card, in the intro, that like, oh, he just happens to be what everything is revolving around. In a very unusual sort of way, too. So, again, I have seen other Sentai series. If you've seen other Sentai series, again, you mentioned the Pirates.
Gokaiger, yeah.
Gokaiger. Have you seen any other Sentais before?
I've watched Go Buster, which was the immediate follow-up to that, which was spy-themed, which I found to be rather charming, but that's just me.
That's the one with where like their morphers are like glasses on their wrists.
Sort of. It creates glasses for their faces, but yeah.
My understanding for that series was that it was very much supposed to be based off of the American FBI almost, or kind of like the American version of what Power Rangers had become. Was that your impression from the series?
Not so much.
Because one of the things they did say it was morphin' time.
Yes, no, they definitely did throw in that reference, and in that particular instance, yeah, it's a cute little nod. But outside of that, it really was just more, hey, here's a spy-themed team.
Okay.
Because like, what's it? Their gun was a camera that like you would see like Private Eyes with in like detective movies like that, but it would turn into a gun.
Ah, okay.
I'm trying to remember what the little saber, like dagger sword thing was. I knew it transformed into something else, though.
I remember that their mechs were very over-engineered.
Uh, Maybe a little, but
Is that, or at least that's the impression I got from the mechs. The mechs had like either all these different parts that came off, or all these different steps to make it into the giant robo at the end of the day.
that I don't recall. But I don't know. There's nothing particularly American about it that like stood out, or like stereotypically American.
Okay, then. All right. I have watched Samurai Shinkenger, and I really enjoyed that series because I enjoy samurai-related stuff at the end of the day. I could not get... I had to eventually get over... had to get over the goddamn katana. So, in Shinkenger, what they have is they have this... They all have... They're all supposed to be samurai. So they have like this ninja... They all have this like samurai katana at the end of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not quite what it is. It's in the shape of what's a katana, but it has this like weird pommel bit that spins around. So what you're supposed to do is you put your little
element disc,
element disc into it. You spin it around, and there's a little mirror that kind of does a kaleidoscope sort of thing, where like it looks like it's moving around and everything. It's this gaudy, unwieldy looking sort of thing at the end of the day, and they all just kind of wear it as though like this isn't weird. Not at all. It's not weird whatsoever.
Okay, to be fair, sort of what you mentioned earlier, the suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
At the same time, these are people wearing spandex suits and helmets, all in the same color.
But mind you, but before they even do that, they have a team that comes by with banners and reveals them in their Japanese, priest attire, pretty much. And then they pull out their phones that turn into their... Again, I think it's very silly that they write the kanji for their helmets, and then that gets on them, and that's what turns into that.
See, I actually don't mind that. I actually rather dig the. I'm personally not a fan of any of the phone morphers from any of the other
series.
Yeah,
I always
but that one.
Yeah, I really do find phone morphers just really, really lazy. Or anything that's got a keypad on it. It's like, you don't need a keypad. Like, it really doesn't. Unless, I mean,
I don't mind
unless
the keypad.
There's a purpose.
I don't mind the keypad because a lot of the wrist morphers kind of have like buttons that you need to press. But that the only reason why I like that particular phone morpher from Shinkenger is simply because it turns into a calligraphy pen, and that's how they write their little elemental sigil things.
What I do like about this particular series...
about Shinkenger or about Zyuranger?
Shinkenger. What I liked about Shinkenger was that they pulled kind of a great little... They kind of pulled a very last minute sort of change at the very end where they introduced, and again, a bit of a spoiler, but I think they did the same thing in the American version here. They introduced this element where the guy that was the Red Ranger wasn't actually the legitimate Red Ranger at the end of the day. In fact, what had happened was that there was actually a female big sister or elder sister that was supposed to be the leader of the entire group, but what happened was that they worried for her protection, so they hid her off somewhere else and introduced her as the correct Red Ranger at the end of the day. What would have been better for me, what would have made more sense for me, it would have come out quite so of left field, was that she was there all the time as like something, like a delivery driver or some sort of like side character that was occasionally giving good advice to the other characters, or some sort of like neighbor or something, maybe something that made it seem legitimate, as though like when she gets there, it's like, what are you doing here, Amy? It's like, oh, well, I'm actually the true heir. No, you're not. You're our neighbor. Because in Shinkenger, she just comes out of nowhere and it's just introduced as like, yeah, I'm actually the leader of the clan. Everyone's like, oh, Okay, yeah, sure. Leader of the clan.
Well, what's it here? Let's circle back.
Okay.
No, I said just a Zyuranger, but are there any other similarities or differences that you noticed between, like, comparing Zyuranger to Mighty Morphin Power Rangers?
Well, again, I mean, one of the other aspects here at the end of the day was that the Zords, or rather the robots here, the Guardian Beast and Zyuranger, but to us they're known as Zords, they're literally gifted to the team by Zordon, as we're in the original, like, oh, they were here and they felt that you needed their presence, so they came out and helped. And it goes back to a comment you made when we were watching it, that they were very much a benevolent sort of additional factor at the end of the day. They're less robots so much as they're just creatures almost at the end of the day that are protecting you, versus just being like, oh, the Tyrannosaurus, that's just a car on treads that's got a cannon on its back.
Well, one thing I've usually noticed from Power Rangers in the U.S. is that the Zords themselves usually end up being like, oh, you're a Ranger, you have a Zord. This is, part of your uniform, kind of, almost.
Yes.
Whereas in Super Sentai, the Zords typically are, not always, but sometimes they're usually their own, like, separate entity that is sentient and is giving the Ranger their power to transform.
Yes, I can see that.
Yeah. No, so I kind of get the sense of that from Zyuranger, just because they are the main characters representatives from different tribes. You had the you had the Tyrannus tribe, you had the Mammoth tribe, the Tricera tribe, so on and so forth.
Another thing you get, and this comes up a lot more commonly in Sentai shows, I think. It's on and off with Kamen Rider in a lot of cases, where the team gets their powers and they just know how to use it. They've practiced. They know how to do their jobs, and that does actually come into fact with Japanese culture. Because in Japanese culture, if you got to that age, you were training to do one particular job by that point. It's not a common factor in Japanese culture where by the time you're 25, you haven't already been studying for whatever career you were going to do and just suddenly change into a new career. So as an example here, if you were training to be a doctor by the time you finished with your doctorate here, let's say 26, 27, 28 years old maybe, as an example. Let's say you finished medical school at that point. That you didn't just immediately go into being a doctor at that point. You didn't just, you were training to be a doctor, so that's you became a doctor. It's not as if you went from training to be a doctor and were like, okay, now I'm going to be a sushi chef. And so in Japanese culture, it's very common for somebody who would have trained their entire life to be whatever it is they're going to be, which is very much a staple of Japanese culture. I mean, once you get out of high school, you train to be you start going into whatever profession you go into. It's kind of a lifelong profession at that point. It's very uncommon for people to find themselves at 40 moving on to a new career path. So, I mean, there's that, that I've noticed. But, because it doesn't quite explain how the Power Rangers, when you see them when they first morph, they're like, oh, yeah, this all totally makes sense. And they're just kicking the butts of the bad guys at the end of the day, versus in the Japanese version, they're just immediately like, oh, yeah, it's time to do the thing that we do. Oh, yeah, sure, yeah, I'll get that out. I'm also curious why it's not the first move they do when they figure out that they've got to do something. Why is it like you got to kind of fap around before you actually use it? Wouldn't your first notion be that, hey, a bad guy. All right, well, let's do this.
I imagine outside of story reasons, it's probably something to do with there's only so many suits that they have, and
well, I mean, they kind of explain it a little bit more when we get to. I mean, when we get to Kamen Rider XA, there's a weird element to it that I don't like necessarily, but they try to make it into a point of context. But do you want to move on to you want to move on to XA here?
Yeah, I don't really have anything particularly in mind to state from Zyuranger. I did like it overall.
Mm-hmm. You'd continue watching it if you could.
Yeah, the tone change is or maybe not the tone change. the first 2 episodes are definitely just kind of like, oh yeah, that's right, this is a show for kids. Second 2 episodes start to kind of veer away from that a little bit because they're finally giving their main characters a little bit more room to breathe and just sort of do their own thing. But otherwise, I do like the fantastical element of that over Power Rangers, but I do think that Power Rangers altogether has definitely made improvements on the show, a la the morphing scenes, and kind of like what you mentioned earlier. There's a little bit more variety in their in their sort of areas, if that makes any sense. They had
Topographical.
Yeah, they had the command center, they had that little gym place, they had the school. Whereas in Zyuranger they only had just the one underground area.
Well, mind you, in Zyuranger they had that one underground area, but then they were also just in the city a lot too, which I don't think we could do here in America, because unless you had a city in which you could constantly play in that wasn't going to be inundated by crowds of fans and people, that you could do that. I mean, shooting in cities is somewhat expensive, as we're in Toei sense. The studio park literally is a background lot in a set, so you could do city shots there, or you could go into your neighboring city here real quickly to get the shots that you needed. So it wasn't as much of a thing, which is probably why they also moved their productions to New Zealand.
Oh, really?
Well, Power Rangers himself is the American version, moved their productions to New Zealand a number of years ago, because it was much easier to film in New Zealand, where you get a lot of tax breaks there, but it's also a lot easier to scout locations, and a lot of the architecture that's kind of in New Zealand as well mirrors Japan's architecture a little bit better in some cases.
Oh.
So you can have somewhat bigger, and that's my understanding of why they moved to New Zealand. But it's also mostly because you could. It's also usually very good seasonal weather there in New Zealand, so it makes filming easier. Which is why a lot of the time, a lot of films are shot in New Zealand as of late, especially if you need large open swaths of fields. For Lord of the Rings, as an example.
I dig it.
Yeah, but Japanese stuff still shoot basically in their backyard.
Alas, on to X-Aid.
So, Kamen Rider X-Aid, probably the most... Again, I chose this one for you because it's about video games and doctors. So, the central concept of this series is that 4 or 5 years ago, this one video game company is trying to make these video games that all had bugs in them. How one game company is making 10 games at once doesn't make any sense to me.
It really isn't.
But these games had bugs in them, which became viruses that infect other people and turn them into bad guys. They're called bugsters. And Kamen Rider X-Aid, with his neon green and neon pink driver, turns into a bright pink Kamen Rider. He is apparently... MU is apparently the legendary Genius Gamer M. But he's a doctor, apparently. Then becomes Kamen Rider X-Aid in order to save other people. And again, he just takes to it like a fish he just takes to it like a fish to water at the end of the day. He's just like, yeah, alright, I know exactly what I'm doing here.
That's because they're part of the shtick was that
they were compatible.
They were compatible in that they were specifically seeking out M, and it just so happens that the main character happens to be M, which I actually rather kind of, well, maybe not dig, but I admittedly I was thinking like maybe that, oh, well, I guess this guy will just have to do, but I wasn't expecting, oh yeah, no, that he is the guy.
I was really hoping that this guy, that he was just like, yeah, I'm Genius Gamer M. I have been the entire time. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And he's not actually that, but he's just, a good guy at the end of the day. And that maybe he actually does know this Genius Gamer M, and even M would be like, no, he's better than me. I was hopeful that would be the tangent eventually, because I don't like the notion of... I always find it very... This kind of goes back a little bit to, like, the Star Wars saga, where, like, everyone thought that Rei had to be something at the end of the day. Instead of Rei just being an ordinary person, no, Rei has to be something unique, special. She has to be some sort of involvement with the legacy elements here. She's got to be something special rather than.
But don't you see, she was the whole time.
Yes, and she didn't need to so much. It fits so much better if she was just, you know, just this one person that just happened to be good at this sort of stuff, and then as a result of that was that stuff at the end of the day. But again,
Also would have been nice if she stayed Rei, just Rei.
yeah.
But this is neither here nor there. This is all that.
That's completely separately different. But again, I mean, I had seen the show. I had seen all the henshin elements to it, so I knew what to expect from it here. I read up a little bit on it beforehand. I found this thing very visually overwhelming at times.
Yeah. Here, for me, let me get the good stuff out of the way.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Go with the good stuff.
So it is based off of medicine and video games, like you said, which are two things I don't think anyone really would have put together.
Typically, no.
Yeah. After kind of having watched it, I still don't think that they should have, but
they're getting the most money out of it, though.
yeah, I guess that's one way to put it.
I mean,
it's one of those things where, like, for example, there's a subreddit called ATBGE, which is short for awful taste but great in execution. And I think that's kind of what this is. It's not a great combination, but it's the but the execution is excellent. It is the best possible mix of medicine and video games that one could hope for. I don't know why you would hope for that, but it is the best of what it is trying to be.
I do kind of appreciate that they are trying to make these two elements into one sort of TV show at the end of the day. I tend to find that the execution is weird because it doesn't follow a couple different logics at the end of the day. It doesn't follow typical gamer logic, which is really, and then it doesn't follow typical, doctor logic as well.
Well, I meant more referring to the stylistic / visual elements.
Oh, that part, yes. I mean, I tend to find that I like the chibi version of the writer forms, the level 1 versions. I find those very, how do I put this here? Very endearing.
See, I don't like them, but I also kind of get why they're there, because typically when you transform, you just go straight to the regular writer form, and this does kind of provide a break from that if you've seen any other Kamen Rider series before.
I like the aesthetics of it, because I think it's kind of cute and funny at the end of the day, that you have this like chibi version of these riders that then turn into these heroic looking variations on their suits. I find it a wholly unnecessary element to the show where you've got to be like, oh, when the Bugster comes out, we have to be in these level 1 forms, because those are the only forms that can really do anything, and then you have to get to, but then you can only get to level 2 once you get the actual bad guy to come out. And I think it's an element that gets moved to the side later as the series goes on.
I kind of hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that it becomes a bit like Kiva, where Kiva's big element was that half of every episode dealt with the writer's father in the past, like 18 some odd years ago. And the dad has like no bearing or tangent on the story at all. So as a result, it makes Kiva gets like only, instead of like having, so as an example, out of a 24-minute episode, you cut out about maybe 2.5, 3 minutes for the ending and the opening and ending. You left with about 19 minutes. Let's just say 10 minutes of that is just the father flapping about. But then you've got the last 10 minutes is the son, but the last 10 minutes is also when he's a Kamen Rider. So you get like only like 2 or 3, maybe 4 minutes with the actual writer person getting to understand and logic him at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, with the father aspect, like, I really hate the father, and the father doesn't have any endearing quality to me. So that's why, as much as I got through Kiva eventually, like, I wasn't a fan of it. And as much as I love the aesthetic of Kiva, that was my biggest problem with it. Now, mind you, when we talk about Kamen Rider X8, I hate there's one element I like of the the Kamen Rider outfits, and that's a consistency in the chest plate and some of the aesthetics, where, with the exception of like the head unit and maybe some bits on the arms,
they are pretty consistent throughout.
All the Kamen Riders look like the same bit, just like a different head piece versus a different arm piece. Like Kamen Rider, Kamen Rider Night, the Night guy has a shield on his arm. The Gunner guy's got like different sort of bits on his arms. Everyone's kind of got a different kind of colored suit that they're wearing, but like the armor bits look the same and consistent across the way, with the exception of the back, which also just has the chibi head on the back as well.
Yeah,
I like the notion because, again, it's all based off the same drivers, so of course it would make sense they all kind of look the same up to a certain point, just slightly different motifs, I guess, is the better way to put that.
That actually just kind of reminded me. The suits themselves throw me off quite a bit. Not necessarily the short chibi versions, but the helmets themselves have the fake hair on them as well as the painted on eyes, which definitely trips me out a little bit. This isn't a normal thing for Kamen Riders. Typically, they have a visor. Same with Power Rangers.
Well, actually, for most cases for Kamen Riders, they have kind of like enlarged bubble eyes.
Yeah, no, the visor itself sticks out of the helmet as opposed to sitting into the helmet, but still, it's a visor.
Well, I mean, the helmet aspect of in the Kamen Riders typically have these like giant eyes. They're usually like, if you are blue, you have red eyes. If you are red, you have blue eyes. So it's a deep contrast, so you can see the eyes more clearly at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But again, this is one of the other weird kind of Kamen Rider series in which you see the head, you see the head sculpt, and you're just like, wow, that's a head at the end of the day. You can clearly see the bits and pieces of the head because it's got the eyes and where
hair.
The mouth would be. And
plastic hair, like a Lego person.
Yeah, there's that too. What do you think of the characters in Kamen Rider X8? Now, mind you, in Kamen Rider X8, the first 4 episodes, we moved through very quickly. We were basically introduced to like the main
4 different writers.
4 different writers that we basically have to learn about, each with their own different motive. You were mentioning this when you were talking, was that there seems to be like 4 or 5 different factions all going off at once. You have like this, what's clearly meant to be the bad guys. You have one Kamen Rider that's acting on his own accord, another Kamen Rider that's acting on his own accord, 2 other Kamen Riders that are working together in theory, but pretty much on their own accords. And then you just have the bad guys of the show, which are just the bugsters at the end of the day. So there's a lot of things going on.
There's a lot of spinning plates, albeit some of them are kind of combining towards the end. But there's one writer specifically that kind of bugs me because, like you mentioned earlier, they'll have their sort of
weird
chibi forms that are all just, that they transform into first before turning into their main forms. And this dude's main form isn't even as a writer. He transforms into a motorcycle. He doesn't even get to like fight crime. He just turns. He is the bike. He is the bike. That is what his form is.
Yeah, I found that very weird at the end of the day as well.
What is your superpower? I could turn into a bike.
I'm a Kamen Rider bike.
Like,
and what was funny about that as well is that you see this bad Kamen Rider, this black X8, who's also got a bike.
Well, okay.
Eventually transforms wearing a bike.
Okay, one of the other things, too, just for context, is that each one of these Kamen Riders is based off of a genre of games. That actually is one of the things that does kind of bug me. There is an evil Kamen Rider whose thing is, I guess, sports games.
So Mighty Action X, which is the main X8 Kamen Rider.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be off of a old school 2D platformer.
Yeah, a la Mario or Sonic.
The Kamen Rider Knight, which I know is not actually his term. I forget what his name is. But he is based off of it was meant to be based off of a fantasy RPG, a la Dragon Quest. I would think is the most common variant of that.
Yeah.
Kamen Rider Snipe is supposed to be based off of a first-person shooter, and then you've got Kamen Rider Moto Quest or motorcycle one here is based off of a motorcycle
racing game.
You would think a racing game, it would seem.
That seems to be his thing.
Yeah. So each one of them have a different game theory, which will be interesting when they get to where we get to see other Kamen Riders. Because one of the interesting notes, you notice how like the little swirling panel goes around them. They have to
there are other characters that were blanked out. I did notice that.
So there's other characters that do exist out there as far as Kamen Riders go. So it'd be interesting to see them when they eventually pop up. What do you think of the drivers? Because the drivers are drivers are always a big deal in Kamen Rider.
I actually don't mind the drivers.
I find them weird.
I don't mind the drivers. I don't necessarily mind the transformation sequence. I think this is actually one thing that, I think this is one thing that I think Kamen Rider kind of has over Super Sentai is the transformation sequence has a little bit more flexibility to it. I recall mentioning this as we were watching it, in that you can be at sort of any other scene and do the transformation sequence, and the special effects artists will just kind of map it to the scene. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Power Rangers, you kind of everyone has to get in line and do their thing and so on. So you end up seeing the same transformation sequence every episode, but with Kamen Rider, there's some slight variability to it.
Well, one of the ones you would like then is you would like Kamen Rider Blade, because when Kamen Rider Blade was happening, basically it projected a like holographic sort of panel in front of you that was like your transformation portal, and once you step through it, when you step through it, you had the costume on you at that point. So all you had to do is literally just have like a split take on one of those, where the camera would just be moving, and then it would intersect the plane. You would cut as you finished moving through it, and then start the new out, and just start it again with the same plane.
Was that Blade or was that Ryuki?
Blade. Ryuki, they were all standing still because remember Ryuki has the mirror element, and they would just stand still.
Yeah, and the cards would kind of come onto that.
The cards would come onto them, and then the Kamen Rider would just be kind of sitting there, always with the same kind of static pose. If you've ever noticed, they're always kind of like the arms kind of up, waiting for it. Actually, Kamen Rider Yuke, I did a little more research, had an American version of that.
One of the few
attempts for Kamen Rider to come to the States. So I'd be kind of interested to see what I'd be kind of interested to see is if they tried to do that here in America, but rather than try to just reuse the same Japanese footage, what if they just tried to do just bought the suits and costumes and just tried to do it here in the States?
As much as I personally would like that idea, I think that's actually kind of the whole scheme of Power Rangers, is that you're cutting down a lot of what would be the labor of having to do it, and you buy the costumes mostly just so that you buy the costumes and the staff here mostly so that if you need to, you can. If you need to make any like sort of reshoots,
you need to do any sort of reshoots, or you need to do any new special elements to it. You have you have those opportunities.
Yeah.
But I would love to see, I would love to see somebody try to do that or something of that nature here. Again, I mean, we've talked about why they won't, which is unfortunate. But no, again, so Kamen Rider X-Aid, again, seemed to move along very quickly for the 4 episodes that we watched. A lot was happening in those first 4 episodes in very quick succession as well.
It was very busy.
But they were also introducing a lot more characters. They typically don't introduce a second rider quite that quick, usually.
Well, one thing I sort of disliked about X-Aid was the tone.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I liked about Zyuranger is that the second half of the episodes, you kind of let the Power Rangers sort of the Zyuranger sort of do their own thing, and at that point I liked it because it was much more fantasy sort of based. This X-Aid is definitely not fantasy based, not by a long shot, which I don't I'm not going to hate it for that. What I am going to hate it for is it is. I'm not sure it knows what sort of tone it's trying to go for. Some of the scenes it's trying to play very sort of straight-laced and sort of, yes, we can do it together kind of thing. And then immediately after that, it goes to slapstick, but live-action slapstick, which is very jarring because in order to achieve that sort of effect, they kind of do a lot of sort of fast forwards and like cuts and just this thing happens at regular time and then they speed up and now it's regular time again, and it just visually speaking it is very jarring. Although one of the things too that I recall mentioning is that at one point I noticed this during the second or third episode, the sound effects and music were starting to drown out the actual characters, and so kind of like how you mentioned, it was very busy. That's not necessarily just in terms of story. I think that's also visually speaking, it's very busy.
Visually speaking, it's very busy, and I think
even audibly, it is very busy.
Yeah, and in the audio element of it as well. And this is again a Japanese dub, so basically they haven't changed the dub on any particular level, but all the video game noises get very distracting as well, I think. So yeah, I mean, I think having watched a couple episodes now, if you had to put a gun to my head, I probably wouldn't continue X8 at all.
Yeah.
And not because and the only reason I would actually want to continue it is because I know the story gets better.
Does it really?
Yeah. I mean, there's other elements that come in, and a lot of people really, really love Hyper Mutekin. X8, at the end of the day, his hyper form has dreadlocks. He's gold dreadlocks. I even love it.
How the hell does that work?
Well, I mean, I like the proto version of that, which is him kind of in the chibi suit again, but like it's kind of like the Hulk with like this little itty bitty head at the top. I find it I find it very endearing look at the end of the day. But I do I know it gets better. I just don't know if I have the patience to sit through it to watch it to get better. And then that's my bigger problem with X8 at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I also have a problem with Poppy at the end of the day as well.
Oh God,
what is she? Is she this hyperactive sort of computer bug element, or is she this serious live actor?
That role honestly could have just been two separate people altogether. They didn't really need to go out of their way to be like, look at me, look at this. I have two separate forms. Call me this while I'm in this form. And one guy is just straight up no.
Well, I mean, even the director guy doesn't. Like, I don't trust him at all either, because he's like, no, you shouldn't know this. And then Poppy's like, but you should tell him. Yes, he should know. And it's like, wait, what's...
Yeah, no, that's another thing that bugs me. Is like, I'm not sure what sort of tone is it going for. Is it trying to be serious, or is it trying to be like comedy slapstick? Obviously, this is still for children, but children can still have serious shows.
Well, you don't necessarily have to call it a serious show, but you don't have to. I mean, you don't have to lie to children at the end of the day. You can do a TV show in which you allow the children to be, to not talk down to children is a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of shows, especially here in America, don't necessarily talk down to children, but don't raise the bar either. Like, we look at, like, if we go back to even just the early, 90s TV shows, like I'm thinking of like Biker Mice from Mars and a lot of these other TV shows. I mean, even Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles didn't raise the bar at all. I think the only ever TV show that I ever watched that really kind of made children feel as if they weren't really children at all was probably going to be Batman and Batman the Animated Series, and then certainly Batman Beyond. And
I mean, to be fair, Batman the Animated Series and Batman Beyond themselves are both just pretty damn stellar.
I really want DC to pull the gun on I want an old Michael Keaton and a young, Terry McGinnis. I want the Batman Beyond.
That honestly, I think a Batman Beyond movie would be pretty cool.
And again, I'm thinking of it as grizzled, get Michael Keaton into the gym so he looks like, like a brick shithouse sort of like old guy, like,
yeah,
because Because again, when I see Michael Keaton, I think that's Batman right there.
Well, here let us skip back.
I'm going off on tangents here. Again, X-Aid, from what I've seen, not my favorite show, but I almost want to keep watching it just because I know it gets better, and I know there's this underwhelming plot to it. But part of my other brain here as well is just that it's not following common doctor logic, because again, how those children get out of that goddamn hospital awfully goddamn quick. Like how do you lose control of children like that to let them out like that?
Okay, that was one thing that did consistently bug me. Speaking as someone who does work in and out of hospitals right now as an EMT, typically when a patient is admitted, you throw a
hospital gown.
Yes, a gown. Wow, I can't believe I forgot the word for gown. But yeah, no, you throw a gown on them just so that way you can kind of tag them as like, this is our patient. Especially if they're being admitted to a bed in a separate room. Because, like, in the emergency room, yeah, they typically just kind of let you keep your stuff because you're not getting an official room. But once you get an official room, yeah, they throw a gown on you and all that other stuff. Because this is like, okay, we need to monitor you for a couple of days. And part of the reason why they do that is specifically for what these kids are doing in the show. These kids not even just one, it is at least two, quite possibly three, I don't recall correctly.
That escape.
Yeah, they escape the hospital. There's even a dude standing out front, and he just lets them get away.
It's just like, oh, well, what's this over here to my left? Why? Is that the swift breeze of the wind blowing against my face? Oh, well, let me turn back this way. Hey, look, there's a child running away. Probably didn't come from my hospital.
Well, not even just that, but, like, the kids are still dressed in, like, their regular clothes. So it's obvious that, like, well, no, not even obvious. It is easy for someone to mistake, oh yeah, that might have been someone who was visiting a patient, as opposed to, that was the patient.
Or, hey, I'm running away from this guy right here. This might be a stranger danger sort of moment.
Yeah, and just show, this is why gowns are thrown on people, to specifically prevent this from happening. You're supposed to be about a doctor who's a Kamen Rider. Get the medical stuff straight, man.
Well, my other problem here as well is just the game aspect, because I do enjoy studying game theory at the end of the day. Not so much maybe game theory, but the production of game.
Okay, yeah, there we go.
And there's logic to me that, like, oh, we created 10 games, and of these 10 games, they all had bugs in it. It's like, you don't develop 10 games at once unless you're, like, a major gaming studio that, can do that. And then, like, their launch party for this one game looks like a very boring launch party. Like all these people are super excited for this new 2D side-scroller. It's like, I'm sorry, what now? It'd be one thing if we were, like, set in, like, the mid-90s and I could see people really excited for a new 2D side-scroller. We're in, like, 2016, 2017 when this show came out. Like, we have better games. And they literally reference that as a third-person shooter that's of the modern-day age.
See, now that bit I didn't necessarily mind so much, but what's it? The main character, I get his whole thing for being a Kamen Rider and a doctor. I don't think I have an issue with his motivation. I think it's just more, he's just a little bit too bright and cheerful for my taste. There's something slightly off about it that rubs me the wrong way.
Okay. So, have you seen other Kamen Rider series?
I've seen bits and pieces of Kabuto. I've seen bits and pieces of Kiva. I've never actually, now that I think about it, I don't think I've ever actually watched a Kamen Rider show consistently.
Okay.
Now that you mention it.
So I've watched quite a few. My two favorites are going to be Kamen Rider Kabuto, because I just love a Kamen Rider that's a dick. At the end, and not a private dick at the end of the day. I mean to say, so Kamen Rider Kabuto, his main gimmick is that he thinks he's sent from God. At the end of the day, he's great at everything he does. He's a prick to other people because he's better than everybody else, but he consistently backs up that he's better than everybody else very consistently. And then one of the other things I love about him as a Kamen Rider is that he's often just kind of As where other Kamen Riders might have like an action pose, like ready to go grapple, like this is my fighting pose. He's often just kind of like standing there, like batting away shots at him, countering stuff. For him, it's like this is all really easy. You're not really putting up a challenge for me at all. And I love the look of the way the suit actor presented that at the end of the day, because it looks at, again, you watch Kabuto and you think like, wow, this guy this guy really has got his shit together. This guy's really good. Like everything else, everything that's going after him is just like an afterthought. Nothing's really stopping him necessarily. So I really love that. But one of my favorite Kamen Riders is actually Kamen Rider O's. And I love O's because disembodied hand guy, Ankh at the end of the day, which I love because he's meant to be like this bird phoenix dude. He's basically a glove that's taken over this other human body that's got this gold hair. Or it turns his hair kind of bright blonde, and he's a real dick as well. But Emiya, or the Kamen Rider at the end of the day, is very much a very naive, good person at the end of the day, doing the best that he can, but you see it in his action where he's just kind of like, how do I do this? In the beginning, at least.
Yeah, that is another thing that I definitely can't tell. I mean, I get it. I think the intention is that it's supposed to come across as... Bless you.
Excuse me.
I think the intention is that he's supposed to come across as, like, foolhardy, sort of, where he's like...
Kamoto?
No. X-Aid.
Okay.
Where he's just a little bit too eager... But he's just a little bit too eager to get into stuff. But the other thing, too, is that everyone kind of, like, and especially in that first episode, goes on and on and on. But, oh, he's a master gamer. This is M. Ooh.
Yeah, we gotta find M, and... Oh, yeah, M would be at the opening of this new video game launch party. It's like, really?
This is the guy we all gotta look out for.
Yeah, we gotta find this mysterious M, genius gamer M. I was like...
And yet, while he's the Kamen Rider, I get he's brand new, but he still doesn't have a damn clue as to anything that's going on or whatever. It's just like, wait, so is he smart or is he not? And especially with the slapstick stuff, he kind of keeps falling on his face and whatnot, and other people kind of have to, like, mess with him. And other people also keep bullying him as well, because, like, they keep calling him an intern, which, you know, in the medical world, if you're an intern doctor...
They did say he was an attending physician, though.
No, they didn't.
Yes, they did.
Mm-mm.
The nurse makes a point of saying, you know, you're the attending physician right now.
You're the intern.
No, she said attending physician.
Mm-mm.
That's what I saw. That's what I read.
The nurse at the beginning called him an intern, but
if you're an intern, wouldn't you have some sort of supervision at the end of the day?
You would be.
You wouldn't be left alone with patients if you were just an intern.
Well, it's not to say that you wouldn't be left alone. It's that if you're an intern doctor, you have someone kind of looking over all of your reports and documentation. You are still in the learning process. It's just that you've completed medical school. You are officially working in a hospital now. But you are still not yet on your own.
Yeah.
And so it's very much implied that this guy is sort of a rookie and at least in his medical profession, but he's implied to be, you know, a master gamer sort of thing. So you would think that would kind of carry over to the Kamen Rider a bit, but no, he just kind of comes across as like a doofus in sort of everything he does, and it's like, cool, I definitely get why these kids are running away from you, Doctor.
Well, you were mentioning a total difference shift here where it's not consistent in their tone. And
yeah.
I absolutely agree that there's a weird tone shift because it seems as though, like, oh, yeah, our way in is that we're doctors, but when we go to do the Kamen Rider stuff, it's all video game related. And it's not initially well explained why that is in this particular sense. And even the guy that gives away, like, the drivers at the end of the day, like, really? You just gave away, like, this really powerful Kamen Rider thing to what you agree is a disgraced guy at the end of the day?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, no. So Kamen Rider Snipe is a disgraced doctor. They even make a point of,
he's
like...
a quack, apparently.
Yeah, no. The other characters call him a quack, and then even in his little, like, introductory little first on-screen appearance, they straight up mention... former doctor, and at one point he even does have an office, but it's like decrepit and like
in an abandoned building, it would seem.
Yeah.
And then the other guy blackmails because he's a coroner, and blackmails to get a common rider driver in trans. Yeah,
That's right, and that's the guy that turns into the fucking motorcycle.
Yeah, and even then he's like, "Oh yeah, no, I lied. It wasn't for a friend at all. I just wanted to figure this all out." It's like, why did you lie? You didn't have to lie at the beginning at all. So basically, what he does is he lies to get the driver, blackmails to get the driver, which makes you wonder, like, really? Why would you trust a guy who would blackmail you? You could deny all the stuff left, right, and center, and nobody would believe a doctor. How would he get this information at all, much less a coroner? But then, like, he acts like all friendly to X-Aid and everything, and then at the very end, it's like, oh yeah, I don't really care about you at all. I'm just trying to I'm just trying to solve this mystery at the end of the day. It wasn't actually a friend of mine that died or anything because of it. No, I just need to solve this mystery.
Oh, that reminds me. One of the other weird things I thought I noticed about the coroner is at the end of his introductory episode, he kind of looks over to Kamen Rider X-Aid, you know. It just at the very end, he's like, and then we can be friends? And he's like, yeah, we can be friends. It's like, yeah, I get it. It's a TV show, but it's just like...
way too trusting.
Not even necessarily way too... I mean, yes, way too trusting, but I mean... Will you be my friend? Yes, I will be your friend. Aha! Yay, we are friends now.
It's also interesting to note here as well is that apparently day 00 day, which is the start of all this stuff, happened 5 years ago, but apparently we're just now seeing Kamen Riders.
Effects, yeah.
Like how does that? I understand maybe it being somewhat dormant for a couple years of some sort here, but then how would you know to create these games here at the end of the day, much less the technology, if you didn't know this was already an issue? Like, you don't create the technology ahead of time to solve an issue that you don't know exists. You create technology to solve a problem that you know exists. I mean, it'd be in the medical field, it'd be like creating an antidote for a virus that we don't know, that doesn't exist just yet, but will in the future. You know, like, that's a lot of forethought there.
Oh, what's it? One of the things... Okay. Entirely off topic. Well, not entirely off topic, but one other thing that did kind of bug me about, not even necessarily this Kamen Rider, but I guess just the Kamen Rider series in general, because it is a recurring trope, is that frequently you will have a bad guy Kamen Rider who is quite literally just the main character Kamen Rider, except black.
Yeah.
I find that to be kind of lazy.
It's not all the time.
Pretty frequently.
No. It's a trope that comes up. Now, again, there is usually... Kamen Rider is one of those shows because, again, it's not a team, so everyone's kind of acting of their own accord.
Yeah.
They rarely have even a two-man team is not common. So, at the end of the day, it is not uncommon for Kamen Riders to each have their own goals and objectives in a story. But it's not entirely that often that we have Kamen Riders where you have the negative versions of them as bad guys. Again, off my head, I can think of Ryuk has one. Kabuto is the next one I can think of. If you really want to count Kiva's evil emperor form that kind of mirrors the emperor form of Kiva at the end of the day. If you count Kamen Rider Double at the end of the day, where, like, even though it's just like one side versus not both sides, maybe. And then I have a hard time thinking of other examples after that.
There's Gaim with orange and then blood orange.
Yeah, but an orange and blood oranges are different things. They don't even look the same.
No, but my point being that there's frequently a bad guy Kamen Rider who looks almost exactly like the main character, except I'm just the evil version of you. I am your reflection. We are not so different, you and I. Ha 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 ha.
Well, I mean, there was a bad guy Zelda, bad guy Wario. I'd have to look into it more, but I could say that maybe it's a common theme of tackling your inner darkness to get to your best.
I get the theme itself. I find it particularly overused in Kamen Rider specifically.
Well, I think in Kamen Rider you could do it. I don't know if you could do it in Sentai necessarily.
There have been a couple attempts in Sentai teams where it's not even necessarily that there's a bad guy team overall. It's just more that, like, oh, one particular enemy has made, like, copies, but they're evil copies.
There is one series that does it. Super Sentai Lupin versus Pata Rangers.
Yeah, but that's more two antagonizing teams overall, not necessarily one team is the evil reflection of it, the other.
True. But that's a series I do actually kind of want to look into because I think it would be interesting. Like, one team is pink, red, and green, which are supposed to be the police, and the other one are the Lupin Rangers, which are red, blue, and yellow. And their uniforms, if you look at it, are very much mirrors as well. Like, the Lupin Rangers are in black and have like a cape on them, but the Pata Rangers have, like, where it would be white, or where it would be black is actually white, and their uniforms are very much similar with the exception of the Pata Rangers have, like, more police kind of garb on them. Like, they have a more utility belt, or a police belt sort of thing, and they have, like a sheriff star on their shoulders, sort of, on their breast and stuff. That's a series I kind of want to see because it does look kind of more interesting.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking we should do our own podcast where we talk about one particular series. We could be like a Super Sentai show or a Kamen Rider season maybe, and we just do episodes where we talk about what happened in it and what we think happened. Because I think we could also, at one point here, if we watch enough of it, we could probably do a Mystery Science Theater version of it as well.
I definitely would not be opposed to that.
But I think with the Mystery Science Theater one, though, it's like we have to have watched it once before, just so that way when we get to it, we can literally make jokes about it. Because then we'll know what's coming up.
Maybe, if anything, I would actually love to sort of do it blind. Okay. For example, one of my favorite things I've ever seen blind was the B movie. Simply because, A, it's the B movie, it's so preposterously strange. But B, I recall watching it with some of my D&D friends for the first time ever, and at one point there's... Wait, have you seen the B movie?
Yes.
Yes. No, at one point...
Seinfeld as a B.
Yeah. No, at one point there's the scene where Seinfeld's B character is daydreaming about being with this human girl, and, you know, they're at a picnic and everything, and then she makes a heart with the airplane, and then she immediately goes into a mountain. And we had to stop the movie for at least like 10 minutes just because I was dying so hard laughing because I could not believe the ridiculousness that I had just seen. I was so very confused and perplexed as to why was any of that happening? Why did that happen? Someone made the decision to consciously put that in the movie, and it's hilarious, and I love it. But just what even is going on?
Okay, well, I have the perfect movie if we decide to do that. That is equally preposterous and dumb, and but I think what we can do that as is if we do it, we record it, and we can't have the full episode. We can't have the audio for it. We can't have the audio for the movie or the visuals for it because that will be a copyright strike on YouTube for that.
Fair point.
But what we can do is we can provide the audio and then somebody can sync it up with the movie at the same time. So there's that option at the end of the day.
There is that. That is very true.
So, but that's an idea for later, and you'll have to tell us if you have any ideas for that, or if you think there's a great Super Sentai or Kamen Rider series you'd like us to talk about, or maybe to look into in the future. We would definitely recommend one of those. But on behalf of myself and my little brother, we thank you so much for listening to us here this week.
Thank you.
And so you can catch the show. We don't have so much show notes this time, but with so much as we had comments on it, we'll have some notes on our website at nerdtutorialpodcast.com as well as the original episode. We continue discussion on our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/nerdtutorialpodcast, all is one word. And then on Twitter, I'm available at nerd_tutorials. So if you have any comments, questions, critiques, or ideas for future topics, we most definitely love them, especially if you have a great idea for a new Super Sentai or Kamen Rider series that we should watch here and maybe do a whole new podcast on. But on behalf of myself and my little brother, we thank you so much for following us here today, and we'll see you guys again next time.
Toodles.